They always say you shouldn't bribe your kids into good behavior. Or at least that's what they said back in my day. But my mom didn't subscribe to that line of thinking because guess what? I was very bribable as a child. Promise me a video game in return for a week where I wasn't being a disaster at school again? Hell yeah, buddy, I'd act like a goddamn angel for a new game. So, shortly before the 1991 school year, I'm heading into third grade, it's late August, and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System had just hit stores. I saw Super Mario World running on the TV at our favorite mom and pop shop at the mall, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. She knew how much I wanted that thing. So, instead of making me wait until Christmas, she got it for me right then and there as an incentive to be good at school, because she knew she could take it away from me anytime I acted like a little shithead. So did it work? Kinda, sorta. I mean, I did have it taken away a few times, but for the most part, I didn't act like an ass because I wanted to live and breathe Super Mario World as much as I possibly could. And I did. Man, I was 9 years old when the Super Nintendo came out. So shit, you want to talk about formative years? There they are. And I loved this system. I still love this system. And I want to tell you about my 5 favorite Super Nintendo games my way right now on Pine Time. Hello, party people. It's your boy Dre, and welcome to another one of my little solo shindigs. You know, I'm getting kind of used to doing these now, and I think they're fun. And hopefully you think they're fun too. And if you do, thanks for joining me. So you might be wondering why I'm doing such a basic bitch topic like my 5 favorite Super Nintendo games, and you are very correct to think that. It is a basic bitch topic, and it's something I wouldn't normally do on this show. So why am I doing it? Well, if you're a regular listener of Fine Time, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but I'll recap my position on this. I think the Super Nintendo Entertainment System is a fantastic console with tons of really great games, but there's not a lot of those games that I would consider all-time greats. Does that make sense? Don't get me wrong, Super Nintendo absolutely does have all-time greats, but compared to other systems I like, I think it has a lot less of them. For me. You know, there's just not much for me at the very, very top. And some of the games people put at the top, I don't think are very good, like Donkey Kong Country 2, for instance. So with that said, I think the true strength of the Super Nintendo is the wide open sea of hundreds of games where you can just like pick one at random and you have a pretty good chance that it's going to be good. The hit rate on Super Nintendo games is absurdly high, much higher than Genesis in my opinion, and certainly higher than anything like NES or Master System or anything before it. That's the reason why I love the Super Nintendo. Not to belabor the point, but if I could put it one other way real quick, if we're talking about like the 1 to 10 rating scale, there's not a lot of 10s on the Super Nintendo for me, right? But there's a metric shit ton of like 7s, 8s, and 9s. And for someone like me who loves to explore console libraries and play stuff I've never played before, the SNES is an embarrassment of riches. But then there's the problem of, well, I guess it's not really a problem, but when people list off their favorite Super Nintendo games, I feel like we can just name them all before they even start. Like, let's be honest. I bet you can name the games right now. But say them along with me, okay? Here we go. Super Mario World, Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong Country 2, or both, Super Metroid, Earthbound, Chrono Trigger, Yoshi's Island. See, you got it. I bet you just said the same ones I did. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, outside of the Donkey Kong countries, I just named some of the best games of all time. Why wouldn't anyone pick those? They should pick those. So why aren't I picking those? Well, like I said, the real strength of the SNES is that vast library of other games that are good to great. And when I really think about it, that's the true essence of the system to me. Those are the games that I think about first over everything else. And over time, I realized that those games are actually the games that truly mean the most to me. And as a result, I still go back to them. Because truthfully, I've played enough Mario World and Chrono Trigger and Link to the Past to last me a lifetime. I don't ever need to play those games again. I played them enough. So, the 5 games I'm going to talk about today are legitimately the 5 that I think about most when it comes to Super Nintendo. And trust me, I'm not out here picking really obscure games or anything outside of like maybe one, because I guarantee you've already heard of at least 3 of the games I'm going to talk about today, because they were popular too. You know, they're just not all from that tip top list that everyone spams. That's all. So I'm genuinely not trying to be contrarian here. I'm just following my heart. And that's why I'm calling this my 5 favorite Super Nintendo games and not like the 5 best games on the system or whatever. Because for once, I'm throwing objectivity out the window and I'm going total vibes on this one. This is vibes-based reporting I'm doing here today. And I feel like that's what everyone else does anyway, because why else would Donkey Kong Country be on all these lists, right? Okay, that's my last DKC joke, I promise. I swear to God. Anyway, that's my criteria. And one more quick thing before we start. These games are in no particular order. Okay? This is not a ranking of my favorites. These are just the 5 games that scream Super Nintendo the most when I think of them. Alright? So enough preamble, and let's get to the games. So, let me take you back to Christmas 1991. And up to that point, the only Super Nintendo game I had was Super Mario World, and I had been playing it for basically 4 months solid. 4 fantastic months, mind you, because I found all 96 exits by myself through sheer perseverance, but I was ready to have more than one Super Nintendo game. And I got 2 Super Nintendo games for Christmas in 1991. One of them was Ultraman, a really jank fighting game based on the classic Japanese tokusatsu series, the one where he grows real big and fights kaiju. I'm sure you've seen it before. I love that show, but kind of a crappy game. The other game I got for Christmas was a little thing called Hyperzone. God, I love that sound. It's actually the first sound you hear when you boot up the game, a sound that's accompanied by the HAL Laboratory logo. That's right, this game is made by HAL, and Hyperzone is a Mode 7 rail shooter. And if you never heard of Hyperzone, I don't blame you. Because despite being the first game of its type on the system, Hyperzone got 0 attention. I'm not even sure I would have heard of it if my mom didn't randomly pick this off the shelf for me for Christmas, presumably because she saw the box art and she thought it looked like fun. And because of that, it took me years to realize how truly obscure Hyperzone is. And its obscurity never made any sense to me because I feel like Hyperzone should have been at least mildly popular. Like, yeah, F-Zero was obviously like the zippy fast Mode 7 thing at launch, you know, and Hyperzone came out just a month after that, so maybe the timing was bad, but man, you know what? F-Zero might actually be a good comparison point going forward here. Because while Hyperzone is a rail shooter, you can't fly around the screen wherever you want, like you can in, let's say, Star Fox or Panzer Dragoon. In Hyperzone, you're actually on a course, and if you go off course, your health will drain pretty fast, much like F-Zero when you ram into walls. And you get your health back in Hyperzone by flying over special neon zones, again, just like F-Zero. It's crazy how there was 2 futuristic Mode 7 games at damn near the same time with the exact same ideas, but 2 completely different genres, a racing game and a rail shooter. That's just wild to me, man. That's crazy. And the thing is, It was Hyperzone that took my Mode 7 virginity, not F-Zero. And that really shaped the way I looked at this stuff going forward because Hyperzone was my measuring stick. But it wasn't just the Mode 7 that was cool. It was the way the 8 stages in Hyperzone looked. With just a mirrored floor and a static background, they did so much with just those 2 things. There's a mechanical factory, a sprawling metropolis, a lava field, a cyber alien brain, even. But my favorite is this green grassy area that looks kind of like the nature land you might see in like one of those future domes in like a fantasy anime that takes place in like 27XX. Like they live on some faraway planet in some dome because like the Earth's atmosphere is like fucked up. So they have to live in the bubble. Shit's incredible, man. Hyperzone was the right game at the right time for me because it set my little kid imagination on fire. The gameplay in Hyperzone works because it's fairly uncomplicated. It's a really simple game. The enemies are mostly square blocks and obstructions instead of creatures, so it's easy to see stuff coming at you without a hail of bullets to dodge. And that probably makes Hyperzone sound really easy, and that's because Hyperzone is really easy. And this was a good thing for me, because like I said, I was 9 years old at this time. I wasn't going out here to the arcade like acing Space Harrier and shit, you know what I mean? So having something easy peasy to play at home was really appreciated, and Hyperzone is very generous to the player with its score play. Again, it's fairly uncomplicated. There's no chain combo multipliers or lock-on mechanics or anything like that other rail shooters have. It's just clean, simple, see guys, shoot guys kind of game flow that, again, was appreciated by a younger me. But the cool thing is, hitting certain score thresholds in Hyperzone upgrades your ship. Shoot more things, get better ship. That's an easy reward system to understand. And not only are the ships radically different from each other, like visually, they also change the game's display to match that new ship you're piloting. They changed like the score font. You get new power indicators and warning indicators and like everything. Like, up to that point, I had never seen any other game do something like that. So that shit was kind of crazy to me. And I loved it, man. That Hyperzone was the best to me. It still is the best to me. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the thing that has never left my head since the day I first played it. And you've already heard bits of it as I've been talking here. And that would be the music. Hyperzone was composed by Jun Ishikawa, who is now obviously known for the Kirby series. But before Kirby, he was just a guy working at HAL doing whatever assignments came his way, and Hyperzone was one of his assignments. And it's incredible. Not to get too nostalgia porn on you guys, but like, there's just something about early SNES music, isn't there? There's something about that instrument set that produced this certain type of sound before people really knew how to do all the sampling and whatever. They were just using the tools given to them to make the best music they could with this very distinctive sound chip. And rarely did anyone work that SPC 700 like Jun Ishikawa did. He instantly mastered that shit. Isn't this just the best? And you know what? I'm going to leave it there on Hyperzone, because otherwise I'll be here all day talking about this music. It's a special game. It's an obscure game. And in some ways, it's the ultimate Super Nintendo experience. Hyperzone is the very essence of this console. There's nothing else I would rather pick to represent everything the SNES is capable of, not just in graphics and sound, but also in ingenuity and heart. Because in a list like this, there's nothing else that matters more. So I'm going to talk about another early SNES classic now, in the form of Super Ghouls and Ghosts. That's right, it's the Capcom classic that's feared for its difficulty, but I was one of those sicko kids who loved it. I was actually anticipating this game coming out because a few years prior, I fell in love with Ghouls and Ghosts at the arcade. So when I saw there was going to be a Super Ghouls and Ghosts, fuck yeah, bring it on. I'm ready. But unlike other games that they brought to SNES where they just added super to the title and like called it a day, this game was not a port of Ghouls and Ghosts. This was a completely new game, much to my surprise. And I ate that shit up. Boy, I spent the entire summer of 1992 trying to beat that game. And I'm going to explain why, because not everyone understands the appeal of this series. So I want to get into the reasons why I think Super Ghouls and Ghosts is not only the best in this series, but one of my favorite games of all time. Simply put, Super Ghouls and Ghosts is a game of commitment. You have to be committed to what you want to do and how you want to do it. And you have to do it with pace and with conviction. And it's the only way to succeed in this game. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make at first, myself included, is that they try to play it like your typical platformer or play it like a run and gun. And Super Ghouls and Ghosts is neither of those things. This game moves to its own internal logic that you have to ultimately respect or perish. You have no choice but to face exactly what the game gives you. And that's where the commitment comes in. Because if you pick up a weapon, you have that weapon and that's it. If you die, you still have it. If you continue, you still have it. The only way to get rid of it is to pick up a different weapon. That means you better not open chests in spots where you might not want the weapon that comes out of it, because you'll have no choice but to take it. Again, commitment. You know? The game is also generous with continues so long as you play its score play and pick up the money bag items, which is not hard to do or anything, but if you ignore them, the game will not take care of you in return. So if you commit to the money bags, the game will commit to you. But the ultimate commitment of this game is the unique thing Super Ghouls and Ghosts does compared to the previous two games in the series. And it's the fact that this game lets you double jump. Now, on the surface, double jumping doesn't sound like any big deal. For people who are used to tons of 3D platformers from the 2000s employing this double jumping technique, often as a crutch for mediocre platforming, but that's another topic, Super Ghouls and Ghosts makes you commit to your chosen jump. You can either jump up, left, or right at a specific arc, at a specific speed, and then you can do it again if you want to double jump, and that is it. You can't control your direction mid-jump, which means you can't soften any overshooting or prevent any collisions with enemies if they're all of a sudden in your way. When you're in motion, you're in motion. If you're about to land on something that will kill you, too bad, get fucked. You shouldn't have been so careless, right? You have to think about these things in a way that very few games ask you to do. And it makes for gameplay and platforming that is so much fun, especially once you really start snapping off jumps and double jumps like it's nothing. I'll never forget how smart I felt when I first started using jumps to carry my momentum backwards while firing forward at the boss in front of me. Because since I can't change my jump mid-direction, I can hold forward all I want and shoot at them while backing off at the same time. And when you do something cool in Super Ghouls and Ghosts, you feel like a complete badass. And that is the best feeling in video games. Every video game should make you feel like a badass. Super Ghouls and Ghosts also excels because it really refines the ideas from the first two games, especially the random enemy spawn aspect. Because since enemies appear however they feel like in any given level, it means you can never memorize the game. That's what makes it so fascinating to talk about with other people, because if someone is like, hey, how do I beat level 3-2? Can you actually tell them how? Because you can't. There's no such thing as, oh, this guy pops out here and look out for the part where this happens. That doesn't work because it's different every time. The best you could do is say, well, the imps have a tendency to move like this, or, sometimes the zombies might do that, and that's about it. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is truly a game of reactions and assessing, but not too much assessing because that 5-minute timer means business. And then you have the commitment and the conviction of movement and jumping. And that's why, when I finally beat this game, it was maybe the proudest I had ever been of a video game victory. And if I'm being honest, it probably still is. And that's what I want to stress to people who are scared of these games, or they hear me talk about beating these and they think I'm some sort of wizard. Trust me, I'm not. I'm not a god. I'm just persistent. I had a will and a desire to see this thing through that I loved so much. And this was at a time when there were no expectations that you would be able to beat the game that you bought, But I wanted to beat Super Ghouls and Ghosts so bad. And so I spent that summer of 92 just trying over and over again, learning more and more what the game wanted from me, how I could approach this enemy better, how I can jump this or that more safely, more efficiently. And all that persistence paid off, and I finally did beat it one night, and you're treated to such a cool fucking ending with this epic, heroic ending song. It is so great. It's one of the best ending themes ever. I hope one day you get to hear this song serenade your own Super Ghouls and Ghosts victory. So, in spring 1992, I wanted one thing and one thing only for my birthday, and that was the home console port of Turtles in Time. I had never anticipated an arcade game coming home more in my life, baby. I wanted that game so bad. Problem was, my birthday was in May, and Turtles in Time wasn't coming out till August. Like, Jesus, to a kid just turning 10, waiting all summer for a game felt like an eternity. Especially back in the day before games had strict release dates, it could show up at the very end of August for all I knew. But I couldn't pass it up. I had to have it as soon as possible. So I took a rain check on my birthday game, or at least one of my birthday games, because I'm pretty sure for my birthday that year was the aforementioned Super Ghouls and Ghosts. But I called a rain check for Turtles in Time. Or, excuse me, the full title of the console port is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time, to follow the fact that the NES games were marketed as a trilogy. And I did not regret this rain check. Turtles in Time on SNES was... Okay, I don't think I'll mince words here. This is one of the best arcade ports of all time, and one of the best beat-em-ups of all time. The thing is, though, I didn't exactly remember it that way. I actually had to come around to this opinion. And there's a reason for that. So let me explain. By the time the SNES version of Turtles in Time came out, the arcade version was largely not around anymore, because back then you had to cycle out cabinets pretty fucking fast because you had to keep putting in the latest and greatest thing. Only arcades that could afford the space to do so would have a row of like 80s games like Centipede and Arkanoid and whatnot, because for the most part, you had to stay up to date to keep your profits up, which means licensed games like Turtles in Time tended to have a relatively short shelf life. All of this is to say, I never played the arcade version again after it came home, so I had no comparison point. The SNES version had just become gospel to me. And because of that, I remembered it the same way I remembered every good arcade port from the era, as a watered down but still very fun version of the original. Even at that age, I understood that compromises had to be made for a home port, but all you needed was for it to be good enough. Street Fighter II for SNES was good enough, you know? And that's how I remember Turtles in Time, as good enough. But a year or two ago, they came out with that Cowabunga collection, which collected every single Ninja Turtles game by Konami, arcade and console. So I got to play the arcade version of Turtles in Time for the first time since I was a kid. And boy howdy, that game is designed to fuck you. Because it's an arcade game and they can't have you be too good at it because then the cabinet wouldn't have you pumping in quarters. And since it preyed on dumbass little kids like me, I was definitely pumping in those quarters. It was the same as Konami jank that all their licensed beat-em-ups relied on. Sloppy, cheap gameplay that they cover up by this crazy audiovisual presentation to the point where they hope you don't notice or care that it plays like wet butt. And since I was a child who loved the Ninja Turtles with every fiber of his being, of course I didn't care that it played like wet butt. But I sure care now, and the SNES version of Turtles in Time is the rare case where the home version is superior to the arcade version in almost every way possible. One, and most importantly, the SNES version's gameplay is way tighter, way more fair, and way more fun. Because this is now a home game, and they already have your money, and they don't have to design it to fuck you. They can now actually make something that rewards you. All that slip-slidey feel of the arcade version is gone, and now we have proper weight and impact to our attacks. That's what always sucked about the arcade ones. It felt like you were swishing at air and like barely connecting with anything, and it was too easy for your character to keep sliding forward as you were attacking, meaning you could never really properly space yourself from the enemy, so they would always hit you back. The much more grippy and tactile feel of the SNES version cleans all of that up. Now when you hit guys, they actually recoil and double over and get stunned. You know, like a real beat-em-up? Like, crowd control was obviously the name of the game in this genre, and you basically did not have that at the arcade. Now, you can keep everyone in check with your own homegrown reflexes and smarts, and it feels fantastic. The second reason why Turtles in Time is better at home is because of the addition of a stage that makes the entire game go. And that's the first Technodrome stage. That's right, for those who never played this at the arcade, this Technodrome stage is SNES exclusive. And it's one of the best beat-em-up stages ever. So you make your way through the Technodrome, fighting off bots and mousers, and then you get to your classic elevator section where you beat up a bunch of guys jumping in the elevator from God knows where. And then when you beat them all, hey, we're at the top. Would you look at that? What a coincidence. Then everything culminates in the boss battle with Shredder, and it takes place from the viewpoint of his mech, which means you have to do the cool-ass move of throwing the foot soldiers into the screen to damage him. It's so fucking rad. It's amazing. Then, of course, this battle ends with Shredder putting the turtles in the time warp, and so begins the rest of the game. Incredible level, A+ stuff. But, as I said, the arcade version straight up does not have this. So what that game does instead is, after you beat the sewer level, an image of Shredder just shows up on the screen and he's like, ha ha ha, I'm banishing you to a time warp. And a tractor beam randomly appears out of his helmet, and then off you go. You're teleporting to the prehistoric level. That doesn't make any fucking sense, bro. How do you have the power to do that? You're Shredder. Yeah, okay, he kind of just does it in the SNES version too, but at least you're in a high-tech facility where you just got done fighting Shredder, so the logistics of it make a lot more sense. The way it happens at the arcade makes zero sense. And yeah, plot doesn't matter in these games, obviously, but the visual language of the game does matter a lot, because there has to be context to what you're doing and why. And that's why this extra Technodrome level is super important. Besides just being one of the best levels in the game, the best level in the game, it sets up the entire rest of the game's premise. It's very bizarre to have a game called Turtles in Time and give zero context why the turtles are going through time. They realized that and corrected it at home. And it made what would have otherwise been just a great game into an all-timer. So yeah, Turtles in Time is incredible. You don't need me to tell you that. But if you're one of those people out there who always felt it was better at home and you could never discern why, just know that it's not you just having nostalgia brain or whatever, or your kid's sensibilities are lying to you. It really was just better. And in an age where there was never a bigger gap between arcade hardware and home hardware, Turtles in Time stands as an absolute triumph and a true Super Nintendo titan. Alright guys, it's hypocrite time. I'm gonna be a total hypocrite right now. So remember in the intro, where I said I didn't want to talk about the usual Super Nintendo suspects, the Mario and the Zelda and the Donkey Kong and what have you? Well, I lied right to your face, okay? Because this podcast cannot continue without me talking about Super Metroid. I have to do it. So yeah, I'm a fuckbag lying piece of shit hypocrite, but here's why I deceived you, okay? Give me a chance to explain myself. Okay, so here's the deal. I don't really want to talk about Super Metroid itself, because people have been doing that for 30 years now, and there's nothing I can really say that's going to bring anything new to the table. We already know Super Metroid is an all-timer, all right? There's nothing to mine there. So instead, I want to make this about me. Since this is a solo show after all, about my formative years, so I'm allowing myself this bit of narcissism. Okay? I want to explain why I felt the way I felt about Super Metroid at the time, and how impactful it was to me. Because as time marches on, the perspective I have on this is becoming more and more rare. So let me share it now. As far as I'm concerned, Metroid was the first game that I ever beat. And over time, my memory has gotten a little fuzzy. It may have actually been Mario or Mario 2 that I beat first, but I don't remember doing those before Metroid. And that's because I was obsessed with Metroid. Absolutely obsessed. I used to draw my own Metroid maps and game scenes on colored construction paper with like the colored markers. And I don't just mean stuff that's in the game. I would make up my own scenes too. I used to take any cylindrical object I could find and wrap it around my arm and pretend to be Samus. Not Mega Man, Samus. I jumped off the couch trying to do a screw attack more times than I can count. I can't believe I'm still alive. And yes, I knew she was a girl, which is usually poison to a little boy of my age at the time, in terms of getting into something, but I didn't care. Samus was the coolest. She was the first video game character I ever cared about. And Metroid was the first world I ever cared about. And you know what? There's going to be a lot of people out there who will tell you the original Metroid doesn't hold up today because it's too confusing or maze-like or whatever. And I'm sorry, but those people are wrong. I just can't relate. I'll have a good time getting lost down in Norfair any day of the week. Anyway, as you can imagine, when I heard there was going to be a Metroid sequel for Game Boy, guess what? All of a sudden, I was very interested in asking for a Game Boy for my next birthday. Because before that, I didn't give a fuck about that stupid brick that plays games in black and white. Ew. But now I'm all about it now that Metroid's coming. So I got a Game Boy, and I got Metroid 2, and I loved it, man. I loved the way that whole world was built, all that spoopy 8-bit music, like the weird Metroid mutations and everything, and especially the ending where you escape with the baby Metroid. Loved it all. And now that you know my Metroid story, let's talk about Super Metroid. Because I'll tell you what, as much as I mentioned earlier that I was anticipating Turtles in Time for my 10th birthday, I could not wait for Super Metroid for my 12th birthday. The first time I saw screenshots of it in EGM, I could not believe it was real. I was like, is a video game really going to look like this? And not only did it look like that, it looked better than that. Super Metroid surpassed every single one of my wildest expectations. Just controlling the goddamn game felt like an extreme revelation. You know, like people who start with later Metroid games are always like, oh man, the original is so clunky, or Metroid 2 is so slow, or, you know, shit like that. And if you're one of those people who say that, imagine my perspective of coming from those older games into Super Metroid. Can you imagine how unshackled I felt? How free as a feather I must have felt controlling Samus in this new game? That's why Super Metroid is in this list. It was the biggest jump from a sequel I had ever felt, and probably will ever feel. Because again, you gotta understand, Planet Zebes was my Mushroom Kingdom. That was the video game land I cared about so much, and I spent hours and hours happily getting lost in that place. Now I'm coming back to that same place years later on Super Nintendo. This alien world my young mind knew like the back of my hand, now it's destroyed and empty, except of course for the space pirates, because that's a thing now. And I'm seeing a Chozo statue come to fucking life and attack me? That's not supposed to happen! That's against the rules! What the fuck is going on? Kraid is now like this monstrosity that's 3 screens tall? Yo, man! And Ridley. What do I even say? Biggest glow up of all time? Jesus Christ. And, of course, everything culminates with that baby Metroid, that thing that followed me home in my black and white adventure on Game Boy just a few years ago. Now it's coming to sacrifice itself to help Samus defeat Mother Brain in what has to be the most jaw-dropping sequence I have ever seen in a video game up to that point. I know it sounds silly to say this, but I really felt that shit, man. I had been on this years-long journey with this continuing series. And here we are capping off a trilogy in a way that I couldn't have ever predicted. As far as I was concerned, gaming had peaked. Every Metroid game after this could have sucked complete ass and it wouldn't have mattered because nothing could compare to what I just played. Or so I thought at the time. But point being, I was just so glad to have been there for that experience. And guys, I'm barely old enough to have had this experience of playing these games in sequence as they came out. If you're not at least 40 years old as of this recording, there's probably no way you could have. So the fact that I did feels pretty special to me. I was born at the right time for something. Hooray, finally. And I think I'll leave it at this. The fact that Super Metroid can be considered an all-timer by people dramatically younger than me, and also by a lot of people who have probably never played any other Metroid game, I think that's incredible. I never knew this game could mean anything to anyone who wasn't along for the whole ride. But as it turns out, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and it means a lot to me too. Super Metroid is not my favorite Metroid game anymore, but it is definitely the one I have the most big feelings about, and that's something that will last forever. Alright, so you know how back in the day, before they played real video games and movies and TV shows, they would always have like a fake game running on the TV? And sometimes they looked way too advanced for a home system, where you're like, okay, no real game looks like that. This is fake as fuck. Or sometimes they would look pretty plausible. And then it's like, wow, if that game were real, I would love to try it. The Ninja Warriors is that game. It's something that really shouldn't be possible, but it's here and it's real. Simply put, the Ninja Warriors is one of the most impressive efforts in Super Nintendo history. But before I talk about the game any further, I need to be honest about something. I did not play Ninja Warriors growing up. I know the whole point of this so far was to talk about my formative years, but I played Ninja Warriors when I was very, very well formed. So I'm not going to be out here faking the funk like, oh yeah, I loved playing Ninja Warriors back in the day, because I didn't. And because I didn't grow up with it, this is not going to be about my memories, and instead just straight admiration for this masterpiece that came to me much later in life than the rest of these. And the way the Ninja Warriors came into my life was via the remake from 2021. I fell in love with that version, and I naturally got curious about how the SNES original fared. And initially, most of the reason why I was interested in going back is that in the remake, you can change the soundtrack to the SNES version from the new arrange. And I did that, and I was blown away at how great it sounded. Like, check this shit out. Listen to this shit, man. Incredible. If you're one of those people who thinks Genesis music sounds better than SNES, I'm sorry, but get the fuck out of here right now, because are you hearing this? This shit is untouchable. There is no comparison. I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, I heard this and I was like, okay, let's try the SNES version. And man, I tell you what, Ninja Warriors is a masterpiece of a game and a masterful working of the Super Nintendo hardware. Because you guys know how it was the first year and a half of this system. The Super Nintendo is notorious for its slowpoke processor, and nobody really knew how to play to its strengths when it first came out, which means some of the most rampant slowdown we have ever seen in this life. as I mentioned before, I love Super Ghouls and Ghosts, but boy, howdy, is it slow down city. Super R-Type, Gradius 3, oh boy, right? Every shmup was, I don't want to say a disaster, but you could count on a lot of slowdown. But by the time Ninja Warriors rolled around in 1994, we know what we're doing now. We know what the SNES is good at and what it's bad at. And the Ninja Warriors does every single thing the Super Nintendo was good at. So Ninja Warriors is a leisurely beat 'em up of sorts, but it's on a single plane. You just move left and right, and the enemies come from those directions, and that's it. Think like Kung Fu for SNES or Kung Fu Master if you played the arcade one, kind of like that. And because the directionality is so simple and the pace is fairly slow, it allows for the game to be more like quote unquote zoomed in to the action by utilizing larger than normal sprites. Not like Art of Fighting or Samurai Showdown zoomed in huge, just a nice size, you know? Your character and the enemies are these impressive pieces with tons of expression and animation, practically fighting game level animation. So right off the bat, you're impressed as hell by the dedication they put into this. This isn't your average crappy home console beat 'em up we got here. This is some real shit. So that's two things right there that are Super Nintendo 101. Zooming in on the action, meaning not too many things can be on screen at once, which in turn means that processor won't get overloaded. Secondly, the big sprites lend themselves to all sorts of additional detail and flourishes that you would never get with smaller sprites, making for this really impactful look. And no, I'm not saying big sprites are a Super Nintendo thing, per se. But what I am saying is that 256 on-screen colors is definitely a Super Nintendo thing. And the careful details in the characters benefit greatly from being on this system. I wouldn't have it any other way. Another fantastic thing about the Ninja Warriors is that all three playable characters feel really distinct from each other, to the point where playing as each of them feels like a dramatically different game. Because let's face it, does playing as Hagar, Cody, or Guy change Final Fight that much? Not really. Like, it's kinda different, but in those Capcom games, the changes can feel somewhat cosmetic at times. Which is not always a bad thing, but that's just not the case in the Ninja Warriors. I mentioned earlier that this game has fighting game level animation, and that's because each character has their own set of very unique moves, much like a fighting game. And if you get good enough, you can even string together legit combos. I don't think there's another beat 'em up that can claim that. And like any good brawler, the moves aren't just for show, they're also utility. And you'll quickly learn what moves knock down, which moves you can pull off fast, which ones do the most damage. And just like I said about Super Ghouls and Ghosts, you'll feel like a total badass when you start pulling this stuff off. There's nothing more satisfying when action game mechanics come together in your hands. And with the ease of use and the correct complexity, the Ninja Warriors make sure you will have a great time. Though, when it really comes down to it, what I think the Ninja Warriors does better than just about anything else is movement. And by that, I don't mean like the literal movement of the characters, although that's like great too. What I mean is the movement of the scene and the direction of the action, the way you get from place to place and the quote unquote movement in your mind as you travel. Because the Ninja Warriors feels like some real deal action movie type shit. There's a scene in Stage 4 that takes place in this tall parking garage, and this helicopter sees you through the opening, and it starts taking sweeps at you with its Gatling gun. So you like hide behind a car as it sweeps from the right, hail a bullet, and it like obliterates the top half of the car. and then it sweeps back the other way, and from the right again. It keeps going back and forth, and you have to dodge it every time. It's like, oh, here he comes again. This is, of course, while you contend with enemies in the foreground at the same time. So it's like you're watching the helicopter, keeping an eye on that, but then you're also like trying to play a beat 'em up. You know, it's fantastic, tense, amazing stuff. Oh, and God, I love those. You know, like in a Hong Kong action movie, sometimes the protagonist has to fight a bunch of dudes in suits. You know what I mean? Like they look like high-powered businessmen, but they're there to kick your ass. Those type of guys are in Ninja Warriors, and it takes place in your prototypical Night City stage with all the high rises, you know, that motif that was so popular back then, and rightfully so. And eventually you do get into one of those high rises, and then you're fighting the suits. And it's like, man, video games are magic, dude. Just the best. I'm sorry for geeking out about this game so much, but like, think about all the times you've played a beat 'em up from this era, and you were just like, it was okay, I guess. But why was it so bland if you had to put your finger on it? I think it's because those games don't put in the detailed work like this game does. This genre is all about having to pay attention to those little things, and the Ninja Warriors nails every single one of them. Anyway, I'll shut the fuck up now, but to cap off my original point about playing to the strengths of the Super Nintendo, everything in the Ninja Warriors comes together because of the Super Nintendo. The big sprite size, the detailed animation, the music, the deep color palette, the deliberately slow gameplay playing to the system's strengths, all of it hits in a way that could never hit anywhere else. Because the Ninja Warriors knows what it is, it knows how to do it, and along the way, it hits the lottery on every single one of its elements. And the result is a top-shelf action masterpiece. Ninja Warriors, we salute you. So yeah, that's it. Those are my 5 favorite Super Nintendo games. These 5 games are the biggest ambassadors of this hardware that I can personally think of. And the reason why I ended with the Ninja Warriors, and this will also be my closing thought, don't worry, you're almost free of me, it's because, like I said, I didn't grow up with the Ninja Warriors. And guess what? It's one of the best games I ever played. One of the core tenets of us covering retro games on Fine Time is discovery. When I was a kid and I went to someone else's house to play video games, I always wanted to play the games I didn't have. I don't need to go to someone else's house to play Mario. We got Mario at home. I want to try Mega Man 3 and Pipe Dream and Low G Man, you know? And that spirit is still with me today. That's the reason why when we do those Nintendo Switch Online shows, it's because we want to see what's out there. Because you never know where you're going to find your new favorite game. But we also understand that not everyone is that type of person. Some people just want their comfort food, and that's it. And guess what? That's totally fine. There's no right or wrong way to play video games. But maybe, just maybe, the next time you reach for that Link to the Past or that Yoshi's Island, maybe just reach for something else. You might like it. You also might not like it, but you'll also gain a bigger appreciation for your favorites if you do. I truly believe that everyone out there can benefit from a little discovery every once in a while, and I hope this show inspires you to do so. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening